So Russian logistics continue to burn across the occupied territories, but as expected, the Russian military is learning and adapting. In fact, just yesterday, Russian milblogger Military Informant said, quote, "There is progress, provided that the enemy does not sharply increase its attacks," end quote. Now, I feel like that's a pretty big ask, but either way, I thought we'd take a look today at what Russia is doing right now to minimize the effects of the Ukrainian middle strike campaign. And we can generally break that into 4 different categories. Each of these we'll dive into in today's video. First, stopping traffic. Nobody on the roads that are getting hit. They've kind of tried that. It's a method. Second, the deployment of mobile counter-drone teams. So kind of a poor man's air defense. We're seeing this in Ukraine as well. It can be an effective way to stop enemy drones. Third, jamming Starlink, which is actually seeming to have some success in certain areas. And then fourth, passive measures. So think about things like nets over choke points. Effectively ways to stop the Ukrainian drones, a last-ditch effort after they've made it through everything else. Now, Russian commentators will add a 5th one to this, saying that the key here is to just destroy all of the Ukrainian drone manufacturing facilities, which is a bit of a long shot, to say the least. So we're going to instead focus on the 4 that are actually happening right now in the war zone. Now, the problem that Russia is trying to counter here is this logistics lockdown that's being played out by Ukraine over the course of the last few months. And it's interesting because it's very clear what Ukraine is doing. They are saying it publicly. It's not a secret. And Russia so far has been unable to stop it, at least stop it in its entirety. So essentially, Ukraine has built and purchased a lot of mid-range strike drones. So think targets between 40 and 300 kilometers from the front. And they have massed these into areas to go after the logistics of the Russian military, cutting off the front line. So, if they require 100% of supplies to keep their current operational tempo and keep their offensive operations on track, what does that look like when it drops by 10%, 20%, 30%, etc.? That's the Ukrainian goal. Rather than try to kill more Russians than they can send forward, they're just going to make it to where they cannot any longer be resupplied. It's having an effect. We've had reports recently of the direct correlation between the number of strikes in this middle range and the volume of Russian offensive operations in certain sectors of the front. So we're watching Russia try to adapt to this in real time. As expected, from the very first strike, one of the first things we said is it's just a matter of time before Russia starts coming up with ways around this. Because to be blunt, if they didn't, the front would be on the verge of collapsing. That's how serious this is, right? You can't go a period of time or any long stretch without being able to supply your troops at the front, especially in the areas like Kherson, Zaporizhia, and Crimea is on the verge of being cut off anyway. So Russia needed to respond to this quickly. That's what we're watching right now. The first item here, the easiest one, I think, maybe, stopping traffic. So we've actually seen some traffic restrictions in place in areas, the occupied Zaporizhia, occupied Kherson, and occupied Crimea. We're seeing it creep a little bit eastward as well into other areas of the occupied Donetsk and Luhansk. We'll see. Effectively, what that does is just remove civilian transport and kind of make easier targets for the Ukrainian military, which was some of the pushback. If you just tell civilians to not be on the road, it kind of gives a green light to anything that is out there. It's a viable target. Now, right out the gate, the immediate Russian response was a significant reduction in logistics vehicles on the road. Something like 70% was quoted from the Ukrainian military. Don't have a third-party verification of that, but it makes sense because all of these trucks, and we were getting some reports from inside of Russia that certain drivers were saying, yeah, no. Are you kidding me? I'm not jumping in the cab of a fuel truck and driving through that area while I'm watching all these other ones get blown up and burned on the side of the road. It is not crazy at all that there is a very sharp reduction in Russian logistics for a short period of time as they figured out how on earth are we actually going to deal with that? So the second big one here is the deployment of mobile counter-drone teams. And this has become pretty popular during this war. Big picture, it's not traditional air defense. So in a lot of cases, it can be a military vehicle. It can also be like an ATV or even a pickup truck. It's more about the weapon systems they have to shoot down the drones than the actual equipment they're driving around in. So prior to the war, you would have assumed that this is some sort of dedicated air defense asset, like a Pantsir or a Buk, something like that. They're just in short supply. Like there's not enough of them on either side. So we're seeing a lot of these mobile counter drone teams move around with different mechanisms to shoot down the drones as they come in. So we're starting to see these in along the southern route in the occupied territories and in Crimea, videos and pictures popping out from the Russian side. Escorting convoys of tankers is kind of what we're seeing right now. There's other areas where these mobile drone teams are popping up at key intersections or key locations like at bridges and intersections. Generally, what we're seeing from these teams is a combination of, small arms to try to shoot down these drones, thermal imaging to be able to shoot them down at night, drone detectors so they know what's overhead and what's coming in. The jammers don't really matter here. Technically, they could have a bunch of jammers, but we'll get into that in a second here. Most of these drones appear to be flying on Starlink or something similar to Starlink, so having a couple radio jammers out there doesn't really do anything. Drone detectors would be valuable. We're also seeing some of the Russians start to use a relatively new tool that appears to be relatively effective, the Yolka handheld interceptor. So this is a handheld, if the name doesn't give it away, interceptor that can be carried around and fired. It has a range of around 3 kilometers, and we've seen it effectively used against Ukrainian drones. So against these Hornets that are being flown in some of these territories in the south, it seems like it would be pretty effective. I don't know that I've seen a video of it actually bringing one of these down, but there's no reason that it couldn't. Either way, 3-kilometer range might sound like a lot, but when you're looking up at a drone flying at you at pretty fast speeds, that's kind of last minute. That's like it made it through a lot of other things, and maybe one shot, one attempt, and if it doesn't do it, you might get hit. Now, we are starting to see a lot of these mobile counter drone teams, or at least talk of these counter drone teams being targeted. And that's something we should expect. And we've seen this on both sides. Russia has been doing this as well. With the initial wave of Shaheds going in, they identify the location of these counter drone teams, then send in follow-ups with sometimes the remote controlled ones where they actually can identify the direction of or they actually fly the drone rather than just have a pre-programmed route. And those ones go after the air defenders. Entirely likely we see Ukraine pulling out something like that, but we've already seen some of these mobile counter drone teams getting hit. The third one, more of a broad item here, is trying to jam Starlink, which is interesting. That hasn't been done really large scale successfully throughout this war, but Flash, an advisor to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, wrote about this the other day, and I'll also have the article in the description below from United 24 kind of summing this up. But Flash said this new electronic warfare system is called the Wave Dome Garant, and is produced by the company Russian Dome. They said one electronic warfare, and the video we have, by the way, is Ukraine destroying one of them, just so you know. So Ukraine has found ways to fly drones into it and destroy it. That's how we're learning some of this. Anyways, Flash says that one of these electronic warfare complexes provides protection for around 20 square kilometers, which that's not a lot, especially when you look at the price tag. They're quoting around $1.5 million each. So that's, you might be able to put this around very sensitive locations. Again, this is the challenge that Russia's having with this middle strike campaign. There is point protection and area protection. All right, point protection is there's a refinery. You want to protect that refinery. So you can maybe put a ring of air defense systems and electronic warfare jammers around that. That is the point on the map that you are protecting. Area defense is we need to protect like the stretch of the lower occupied territories, the land bridge from Rostov over to Crimea, or we need to protect all of Crimea. That requires a dispersion of assets that can be done, but when you're talking about $1.5 million for every 20 square kilometers, it's not feasible to do it that way. Okay, so this Starlink jammer, maybe we'll see it used around things like bridges or choke points, things like that. In terms of the details of how this works, I'm not going to pretend to understand the nuance of electronic warfare and all the technical aspects here. That's why the article is below if you want to check it out. But Flash says that it's mounted on trailers. Each trailer has 2 antennas, and the entire complex is 6 trailers. So this is big. There are jammers that are borderline handheld. So this is a massive system to try to shut down Starlink. And they added that it does consume a lot of electricity, but that the complex can operate on generators as needed. Again, most of the information we have about this right now is not that it is highly effective, but that it can be effective and that it has been struck already by some Ukrainian drones. But that is certainly something to keep an eye on if Starlink starts to be shut down in any broad context. The last one here, the fourth item, should all these other ones fail, is some sort of passive defense, and we just aren't really seeing this at all at this point. The simplest one to point you to are nets. And we're seeing these pop up on both sides of the line. Generally speaking, nets will protect against smaller drones. I don't know if it's going to work against one of these Hornets. Like on the Ukrainian side, the nets don't do a whole awful lot. If there's a Russian Lancet flying in, technically it might be able to stop it, but the larger drones at times are just going to plow right through that netting. And if the target on the other side of the net is a fuel truck, I'm not sure, you need to score that big of a hit to cause serious damage, right? It doesn't have to be an impact directly on the tank to send that thing up in flames. So I believe we've seen a video. I was looking for this earlier and couldn't find it, but I believe we've seen a video of one of the Hornets going right through one of the nets. But either way, put together effectively and put together the right way, it could be a viable protection measure. We just haven't seen that really rolled out in some of these areas. They're far enough away from the front that they weren't really dealing with the drone threat up until a couple months ago. I would expect that we're going to start seeing some of these nets over areas like staging locations. We've seen a couple parking lots full of Russian trucks get targeted. I have no idea why they're not putting up some sort of passive defense there like that. Just netting, just make it a little harder for Ukraine to hit these trucks that right now are sitting out in the open. Another one getting complaints about on Russian media channels is the lack of any indicator for civilian traffic. So what we saw, or I saw, and we see it in Ukraine a couple times, but last time I was there in Kherson, they have a red light, green light situation where it's just full of Russian drones over that city. And red light means there are actively Russian drones overhead. Green light means we don't think there are any right now. We're not detecting any right now, but of course they could pop up at any moment. And they had those set up for certain stretches of the road. So you can kind of track as you were going. Like, do I want to roll the dice and make this next stretch, or sit back and wait for that light to turn green? How important is this travel? They're not using that yet, from what we can tell, in some of these areas now getting hit by Ukrainian drones. So we should expect something like that to pop up, effectively telling the trucks, the cargo trucks, don't drive right now. Wait for this drone to pass, or wait for this drone to be intercepted. Now, the Ukrainian counter to every one of these is effectively more drones. That's kind of like the short answer. And it's an interesting one because it looks like Ukraine has the drones here. We also don't need to see Russian supplies go all the way to zero. This is not like, I don't know, maybe a bridge is an example where the bridge needs to be completely taken out before it can be utilized at all, or at least to the 90+% damage. In this, any sort of reduction, again, 10%, 15%, 20% reduction in logistics moving forward has a direct impact on the front. So in a perfect world, Ukraine has destroyed every bridge moving into Crimea, has completely isolated that peninsula, and makes it to where supplies cannot move across the land bridge at all. Zero would be a great number. That would have a direct, significant impact on the front lines. That's probably not reasonable. So again, every single time Ukraine is able to fly a drone into these areas and it slows the trucks or destroys one and forces others to move in convoys or to stop and wait for that green light when that technology comes about, that is having an effect. But either way, as expected, Russia is making adaptations and doing everything it can to kind of staunch the bleeding from this middle strike campaign that is very much still ongoing. Now, quick fundraiser update for you guys. We've been working with Car for Ukraine all year to provide a lot of vehicles to the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade. But something that's cool throughout this campaign that we kind of negotiated with Car for Ukraine is, I said, what if we get requests from other units? Do we have the kind of the bandwidth to support those? And today we've got a vehicle delivered to the 2nd Battalion, 12th Special Forces Brigade Azov. So this is a gentleman that reached out a couple months ago, said, hey, actually it wasn't even a couple months ago, it's more recent than that. He said, hey, they're short vehicles. They just lost one. Can we try to put something together to help them out? We tied it into this campaign. Bam. Vehicle delivered a couple days ago due to the generosity of you all. So the current campaign, the summer push, I want to say we're like 25,000 euros of a 97,000 euro goal. Got some unique patches. And of course, you donate more, you get your name on the side of the truck with a sticker. Or if you want to, you can even coordinate with the Car for Ukraine team with a big enough donation and drive that car in yourself. But either way, to learn more about those vehicles that are so critically important to operations at the front, be sure to check out the link in the description below. That's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.